To borrow a phrase from Gordon Ramsay, some people within the world of horror are simply an idiot sandwich. You know, the ones who make a bunch of stupid decisions, who avoid plenty of red flags, who bumble and stumble their way through a horror movie, regardless of their own ineptitude, and then eventually these characters tend to wind up dead. However, there are some of these characters who, despite being complete boneheads, somehow, some way, end up actually surviving. So with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are the dumbest horror movie decisions that people survived. Getting Stoned, The Strangers, Chapter 1. As a big fan of the previous two movies, The Strangers Chapter 1 was just such a massive disappointment, being pretty darn dull, extremely repetitive, and featuring some properly bonehead decisions. On that front, likely the worst decision of the bunch comes from Maya, one half of some lovebirds who wind up tormented by the trio of masked killers during a stay at a remote Airbnb. As was the case with the first movie, this terror, it begins with a knock at the door and an ask for Tamara. This happens when both Maya and her partner Ryan are home, freaking them both out, as it would. When Ryan then has to take a quick trip to town after losing his inhaler, the already freaked Maya is left alone, only for another knock in, another ask for Tamara, and even more dread being drummed up. So, bafflingly, Maya decides to add to the trippy, strange nature of all of this by lighting up a joint, getting thoroughly stoned by the time Ryan returns, making her question what's real or not, and rendering her fairly useless against Man in the Mask, Ghostface, and Pin-Up Girl. Still, it is Ryan who ends up dead by the end of the movie, with Maya alive and returning in The Strangers Chapter 2 later this year. Not Letting Sleeping Dogs Lie, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. Now, for my taste, Jason Lives is one of the very best Friday the 13th movies, famously featuring franchise favourite Tom Matthews as Tommy Jarvis, and being the third leg of what fans know as the Jarvis Trilogy. However, you have to question Tommy's logic in the film's opening moments, you really do. Of course, Jason had been killed by the teenage Tommy back in Part 4, the final chapter, with Part 5, A New Beginning, seeing Tommy tormented by Jason copycat Rory Burns. So by the time of Jason Lives, the now adult Tommy decides that he needs to make sure that Jason is really dead, despite there having been no Jason activity for years by this point in time. So Tommy and his pal Alan head to Crystal Lake, now renamed Forest Green, and they dig up Jason's body. A stupid decision, a ridiculous decision, particularly as, yes, Jason is totally dead. That is, until Tommy stabs Jason's corpse with a metal fence post, which is then hit by a couple of lightning bolts conveniently that bring Jason Voorhees back to life, where he quickly kills Alan and then embarks on yet another murder spree. Still, despite that, Tommy is one of the few who make it out of Jason Lives alive and in one piece. Just leave immediately. Poltergeist. Released in 1982, Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist is one of the all-time great PG horror movies, being a gateway into horror for many a young fan. A traumatizing gateway, of course, but a gateway nonetheless. Here we have the Freely family, living their best life all in their lavish dream house. That is, until certain supernatural shenanigans start to kick in, starting with mildly odd TV static, to a glass breaking, cutlery bending, to then more major things like an entire kitchen being flipped upside down. Before you know it, tormented, twisted tree branches are trying to pull the family's kids into another dimension, and the youngest of the bunch, Carol Ann, is indeed taken to another dimension. There's mediums, there's terror, and there's a desperate rescue mission where family matriarch Diane just about manages to drag her daughter back to the normal world, the two covered in all sorts of ooey gooey exoplasm. Pretty traumatic, right? Absolutely 100%. Still, rather than immediately get out of Dodge, the Freelings inexplicably make the decision to spend one more night in the house. Yes, forking out for a hotel stay for a family of 5, that won't be cheap, but damn it man, Steve Freeling is an estate agent, a realtor, so what's a few bucks, especially to give your family a little bit of peace of mind? Especially when that family has just been through such an ordeal. Hey, there's this creepy house where we've all been attacked by supernatural forces, including one of the kids kidnapped to a whole other dimension. But nah, let's stick around for one more night, eh? We'll pack up and leave tomorrow instead. And so, by doing that, of course the Freelings have yet another bout of supernatural chicanery. Poor Robbie Freeling attacked by a possessed clown doll, the spirits coming back for Carol Ann, and Diane thrown around her bedroom like something out of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Granted, the Freelings would just about managed to get out of the property before it caved in on itself. But so much extra grief could have been avoided if they'd have just bolted as soon as Carol Ann was back home safe. Flaunting pandemic rules. Sick. Oh, their memory is still far too fresh of those dark days of the global pandemic, the days when the world shut down, where we weren't allowed to see friends and families, masks were a must, and we were all testing ourselves on a regular basis. Now, of course, there were a whole bunch of conspiracy theories on this, but at the end of the day, the aim was for each person to do their utmost to protect themselves and to protect those around them. Alas, Parker from 2022 Sick did not get the memo. Well, she did, but she just didn't really care about it, to be honest. Set during those grim pandemic days, Sick sees Parker and her pal Miri head out to a remote lake house to quarantine themselves away from the world. The problem is, Parker is just a smidge lax, not really wearing a mask out in public, not really testing herself, not really all that fussed about the whole COVID thing, really. But that's where things come back to bite her. For Parker and Miri, they end up attacked by some masked killers, and it all ties back to the thing. As in, due to Parker's lack of care for COVID rules, she not only has COVID, showing no symptoms, but she's previously been to a party where a guy she copped off with caught COVID and died. And these mass killers, they're that guy's parents and his elder brother, seeking revenge on Parker. And all of this could have been avoided if Parker didn't think partying was still cool during those times, didn't think hooking up with someone was cool during those times, without having tested yourself nonetheless. And if Parker just wasn't a selfish and considerate a-hole, really. Still, like the rest of the people in this video, Parker ended up coming out on top by the time Sick ends, with all three killers ending up dead as Parker and Miri are left standing tall, choosing to ignore all the red flags. Speak No Evil 2024. Released in 2022, Christian Tapdruff's Speak No Evil is a stunning film full of fantastic performances, masterful tension, the sort of film that makes your skin itch with some of the decisions made, and it all ultimately ends in total disaster. It is a brilliant movie, yet it is a movie that you will likely only ever watch once. Such is the sheer depressing brutality of its end. However, for the 2024 English language remake, there's still the same boneheaded decisions, just with a slightly cheerier finale. Both films follow a couple and their daughter who make friends with another couple and their son while on holiday. And when that second couple invites the first couple to visit them in their homeland, it soon becomes apparent our hosts, they are a smidge erratic. In that first film, it's a Danish family visiting an unhinged Dutch couple. In the remake, it's an American family visiting some Brits. Those Brits, they are Paddy and Kira, with their son Ant, and the US visitors are Ben, Louise, and their daughter Agnes. Passive-aggressive, it does not come close to Paddy and Kira's relationship, and every single frame of the film is yelling at Ben and Louise to pack up and get out of there. And even then, when they do get out of there, they have to return to their hosts after Agnes left a stuffed toy behind. Like, seriously kid, you had one job. Even though it's now at this point well known that these Brits are indeed serial killers. Serial killers who are aware that their plans have been rumbled. It's just so dumb, so many red flags, and that is kind of the point of the film, to be fair, of people knowing things are wrong, but saying nothing for fear of rocking the boat, of upsetting someone, of calling people out, even in this case if they are serial killers. Anyways, unlike the original, where the idiot couple are stoned to death and their daughter's tongue is cut out, this time the redo has our US travelers managing to kill their would-be captors. Yay, I guess. Stupid decisions all the way through. Lying to the world and putting yourself in Jigsaw's crosshairs. Saw 3D. Now, by its nature, the Saw franchise is one full of unlikable characters, with so many victims finding themselves in their unique situations due to the horrible things they've done. But of all the characters in the series, few are as unlikable as Saw 3D's Bobby Dagan. This is a purported self-help guru who became rich and famous after telling his story of being a survivor of one of Jigsaw's schemes. Only, of course, he's completely lying about all of that. Proper chance of this fella. As such, it's Detective Hoffman who gives Bobby his own personal Jigsaw experience. And not just Bobby, for Hoffman also brings in all of those who help Bobby fabricate his tall tale and make a bunch of money from it. It turns out Bobby is a total moron, totally incompetent, as shown by him failing to save a single one of his fellow players. Until it comes down to him and his wife Joyce, who, to be fair to Joyce, I mean, she was pretty much an innocent bystander in all of Bobby's BS. So the final test for Bobby is him having to pass the test that he he lied about passing previously, which would be driving 2 hooks through his pecs and lifting himself above the ceiling to deactivate the trap that Joyce is stuck in. But yeah, those hooks, they tear through Bobby's flesh, dropping him to the floor as poor Joyce ends up burned alive. Granted, watching your wife become toast is clearly traumatic, but Bobby ends up still alive by the time all is said and done with Saw 3D. Not killing an unconscious Ghostface. Scream 2. Yes, it's our obligatory Scream mention. But to be fair, you have to ask yourself, what was Sydney thinking here in Scream 2? After a deliciously tense car crash sequence, Sid and her new best pal Hallie are trapped in the back of a police car that's been crashed by Ghostface. As in, Ghostface is unconscious in the driver's seat, where Sydney and Hallie are forced to slowly crawl over the killer's body, which again is a brilliantly tense sequence. At this point, either of these ladies could use Ghostface's knife or the dead cop's gun to shoot this mass killer, bringing an end to this whole ordeal. Well, apart from the fact that there is a second killer out there, which hadn't been revealed by this point in the film. Instead, the two escape the cop car without laying a finger on Ghostface, which immediately comes back to bite them on the backside when Ghostface gets away and murders Hallie mere moments later. Of course, despite this dumb decision, Sydney survives Scream 2, and Scream 3, and Scream 4, and 2022 Scream, and survived by default by sitting out of Scream 6, with Sid returning for Scream 7, where hopefully there won't be any such stupid decisions that cost the life of another one of her pals. Trying to electrocute the entity, It Follows. While David Robert Mitchell's It Follows is one of the more creatively eerie horror films of the past decade or so, admittedly the film isn't without a few sillier moments. Namely, central protagonist Jay and her friends come up with the bonkers plan to kill the seemingly unstoppable entity by luring it to a swimming pool and electrocuting it, using Jay as bait no less. Of course, the entity sees through this plan and just starts throwing electrical items into the pool, near enough electrocuting Jay, then also attempting to drown her. Great plan, guys. To be fair, writer-director David Robert Mitchell has said in interviews how this was intentionally dumb. As he once said to Vulture back in the day, it's the most stupid plan ever. It's a kid movie plan. It's something that Scooby-Doo and the gang might think of, and that was sort of the point. Fair enough then. Still, as a character, it's a ridiculous idea from Jay and her crew, but luckily for her, she managed to make it to the end credits, regardless of the risky pool stunt. Getting pregnant during an alien invasion. A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place is a fantastically white-knuckle horror film that absolutely makes the most of its central gimmick. That'd be the aliens invading Earth who hunt by sound, forcing mankind to, shut up and keep quiet in order to survive. A concept we're brutally introduced to early on with the death of young Bo Abbott. However, when being fully aware of the stakes here, of the doomed world humanity now lives in, there is one baffling decision that comes to the fore. That decision is for the Abbotts to get pregnant with another baby. Now, in some way, you could understand the Abbotts wanting another child to fill the void left by Bo's death, but their priority right now really should be all about focusing on protecting their other 2 children. And you could even understand if Evelyn Abbott became pregnant prior to the alien invasion. No, that is not the case. When looking at the timeline of A Quiet Place, the Death Angels invasion started on June 18th, 2020, whereas baby Abbott, they were born on October 3rd, 2021, 473 days into the invasion, or just over 50 months after the invasion started if you want to go that route. Given how a pregnancy usually lasts around 9 months, that means that the Abbotts, they got pregnant while the alien onslaught was already ongoing. And these things can happen, but you think you'd be fully focused, given the wider situation, of doing everything you can to not bring a baby into this hellscape. Not least in how babies, they tend to scream and cry a fair old bit. Again, aliens that hunt by sound. Come on, guys. Either way, despite this questionable decision, Evelyn does make it out of A Quiet Place alive. Her husband Lee, not so much though, for he ends up sacrificing himself to the aliens the very next day after baby Abbott arrived. Poking the bear, poking the shape. Halloween Resurrection. You know what? So many people dump on Halloween Resurrection, and it is a film that is so easy to dump on. But to give it some mild credit, at the time of its release in 2002, the concept of Resurrection was at least an intriguing one. With reality TV at that point becoming a thing, Resurrection tried to capitalize on that by essentially going all Big Brother on Halloween night in the infamous Myers house. While the idea itself was intriguing and the execution was questionable at best, of course, the in-universe decision from Freddie Harris and his Dangertainment company to do this, ill-advised, doesn't even come close, Freddie. Like, why take the risk? Why poke the bear? At this point, it's 3 years after the events of Halloween H20, where Michael was purportedly beheaded. But this is someone who, at least in this timeline and canon, came back 20 years after his supposed death in Halloween 2. So 3 years, yeah, it's nothing, it's chump change. I get it, setting up a live stream in the Myers house, on Halloween night no less, was obviously done to pull in viewers and make some dollar. But it was just such a stupid decision, man. A decision that resulted in the deaths of 7 people in and around that house that night. And that's without the obvious elephant in the room of questioning Freddy's decision to bust out some kung fu moves on Michael, which sadly kind of worked because this movie sucks. Anyway, Freddy survived, the end. That movie, man, just awful. Nearly as bad as The Curse of Michael Myers.